Sophia's hand flew to Madame Margaret's mouth the very second the bedroom door began to creak open, the sound slicing through the tense silence like a knife through silk. "Don't talk," she whispered urgently, her breath tight and shallow, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and fierce determination that made the moment feel suspended in time. On the other side of the door, a man's voice drifted through the narrow crack, calm and cold, carrying the weight of malice wrapped in everyday casualness. It was Jacob Nelson, Madame Margaret's husband, talking on the phone as if he were ordering new shoes from a catalog, his tone devoid of any hint of the storm he was about to unleash. "She's 48, no child. Her parents are gone. Everything will be mine. We finish it quietly tonight." Sophia's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she could hear the frantic rhythm echoing in her ears, a thunderous drumbeat of terror that drowned out everything else. Madame Margaret's fingers clutched Sophia's wrist with a grip that was both desperate and trusting. The two women standing frozen in the soft, dim glow of the hallway light that cast long shadows across the polished marble floor. One was dressed in a luxurious blue lace wrapper, her reading glasses hanging from a delicate chain around her neck like a symbol of refined elegance. The other in a simple maid's dress, crisp and unassuming, holding a fresh stack of towels that suddenly felt as heavy as stone in her trembling hands, the weight of the moment pressing down on her like an invisible force. The doorknob turned slowly, the metallic click echoing like a countdown in the charged air. Jacob took a step forward into the hallway, his polished shoes gleaming under the chandelier's faint light, oblivious to the danger he'd just voiced aloud. Sophia didn't breathe, her body rigid as she held Madame Margaret back, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to snap. Then, just as the door began to open wider, Jacob stopped abruptly. He laughed into his phone, low and bitter, the sound crawling along the walls like a sinister whisper, and the door eased shut again with a soft creak that seemed to seal their fate for a heartbeat. "Don't worry," he continued to whoever was on the line, his voice fading as his footsteps moved away down the corridor, growing distant like the retreating echo of a threat. "I'll make it look like an illness. After all, she's stressed. The company runs her day and night." The call cut off with a click, and silence swelled like a drum in the aftermath, heavy and suffocating, wrapping around the women like a shroud. Madame Margaret looked at Sophia, shock washing across her face like cold rain on sun-warmed stone, her elegant features paling as the full horror of her husband's words sank in. Sophia swallowed hard, her throat dry as sandpaper, her hand still pressed gently but firmly over Madame Margaret's mouth. "Ma," she whispered, her hands shaking but her voice steady as forged steel, cutting through the fear that threatened to overwhelm them both. "Please listen to me first." And that was how the worst night began. A night that would unravel secrets, test loyalties, and forge an unbreakable bond in the heart of betrayal's shadow. Hours before that chilling moment, morning had risen soft and golden over Lagos, the sun's rays filtering through the palm fronds that swayed gently in the light breeze rustling outside the grand windows of the mansion in Eco. The white mansion in Eco woke up like a quiet ship gliding through calm waters, its wrought iron gates sliding open with a soft hum, sprinklers ticking rhythmically across the manicured lawns, and the kitchen humming with the comforting aroma of sweet tea brewing on the stove and fresh bread baking in the oven, filling the air with warmth that belied the storm brewing beneath the surface. Sophia had been awake since 5 a.m. as she always was, her internal clock tuned to the rhythm of service long before the household stirred. She moved like a gentle wind through the opulent halls, her simple maid's uniform whispering against the polished floors as she went about her tasks with quiet efficiency, mopping until the marble gleamed like still water under the morning light, rinsing surfaces until they sparkled, folding linens with precise creases that spoke of care beyond duty. She checked the vibrant flowers by the grand piano in the living room, arranging them just so to catch the sunlight streaming through the sheer curtains, wiped down the intricate glass rail along the sweeping staircase that led to the upper floors, ensuring every crystal-clear pane reflected perfection. She counted the crystal glasses before an important meeting, making sure each one was spotless and ready. She checked the batteries in the remote controls scattered throughout the common areas, replacing them silently so no interruption would mar the family's evening. She noticed a faint scuff mark on the grand hallway wall near the family portraits and covered it discreetly with a framed photo, ensuring Madame Margaret wouldn't see even the smallest imperfection. Stress had no place in a home where peace should reign supreme. Sophia did these things because she knew, deep in her bones, what it felt like when a home had no peace, when the walls echoed with arguments instead of laughter and the air hung heavy with unspoken worries. Her parents had died years ago, first her father taken suddenly by illness, then her mother following like two candles blowing out in the same relentless wind, leaving Sophia to navigate a world that offered little mercy to those without safety nets. Since then, life had been a relentless grind. One job here as a cleaner in a bustling market stall, another there as a server in a noisy restaurant, sometimes a bed in a cramped shared room, other times a hard bench in a crowded bus station waiting for dawn. She had learned to be quiet, quick and careful in every movement, to make spaces feel safe and welcoming even when her own pockets were empty and her dreams felt like distant stars just out of reach. When she got the work in Madame Margaret's house 3 months ago, after weeks of scraping by on odd jobs that barely covered her rent in a tiny room on the outskirts of Eco, she told herself with quiet resolve, "Give this house your best. Make it run like a song, smooth and harmonious, so no note falls flat." Madame Margaret noticed. Sophia could tell from the way the billionaire CEO of the biggest fabrics company in Nigeria would pause in her busy schedule to offer a simple thank you when Sophia went above and beyond. She was firm but fair, her presence commanding respect without demanding it, always dressed in flowing blue lace that seemed to embody elegance itself, her reading glasses perched low on her nose as she pored over designs that hung in shop windows from the bustling streets of Yaba to the upscale boutiques of Victoria Island. Sometimes, when work ended late into the evening and the mansion settled into quiet, Madame Margaret would call Sophia into the study, her voice soft and inviting, and make her a cup of tea too, the steam rising like a bridge between their worlds. They would sit at the big mahogany table under the warm glow of a single lamp, talking about nothing heavy, just favorite books that transported them to far-off places or how the streets of Lagos sounded after a sudden rain, the honking horns giving way to a symphony of dripping leaves and distant thunder. "Your hands are careful," Madame Margaret had said once, watching Sophia arrange the fresh roses in a crystal vase with stems cut just right. "Careful hands save a home from breaking, mending the small cracks before they spread." Sophia had smiled then, a quiet warmth blooming in her chest, feeling seen in a way she rarely did. "Careful eyes too, ma," she had replied softly, her voice carrying the weight of unspoken stories from her own fractured past. But there was one shadow that loomed over the otherwise serene house: Jacob Nelson. He was tall and handsome in a polished way at 55 years old, with a smile that never quite reached his calculating eyes, always lingering a beat too long like it was hiding something sharper beneath. He didn't work, at least not in any visible capacity, and he didn't have to, living off Madame Margaret's success as if it were his own by right. He flew on her private jet to exotic destinations, drove her sleek cars through the bustling streets of Lagos with careless speed, ate lavish meals with the board members during high-stakes meetings, and liked to wave at cameras during public events, his arms slung possessively around his wife's shoulders for the flashing bulbs. But in the quiet corners of the mansion, away from prying eyes, his laugh felt sharp and insincere, cutting through conversations like a misplaced note in a melody. He would toss his expensive shoes haphazardly in the living room, leaving them for Sophia or the other staff to step over and clean up without a second thought, his entitlement as casual as the designer suits he wore. He would say things like, "What's the use of all this money if we can't live free?" with a wink thrown Sophia's way as he demanded another drink from the well-stocked bar, his voice slurring slightly from the whiskey that seemed to flow freely in his hand. Sophia didn't judge openly, it wasn't her place and survival had taught her to keep her thoughts tucked away like hidden treasures, but she watched. She noticed how he never asked Madame Margaret about her long days running an empire, how his eyes rolled dismissively when she took late-night calls from international clients, how his gaze sometimes lingered on that small wooden cradle displayed in a glass cabinet in the hallway, a cradle that had never held a child, gathering dust like a forgotten dream. That afternoon, as a storm gathered ominously over the city, the sky turning heavy and gray with clouds that seemed to press down on the mansion like a lid on a boiling pot, the first distant thunder rumbled like a far-off drum signaling trouble ahead. Sophia finished cleaning the living room, her cloth gliding over the surfaces one last time to ensure everything gleamed, and headed toward Madame Margaret's bedroom to change the fresh sheets and wipe down the side tables, her arms laden with linens that smelled faintly of lavender from the laundry. As she reached the doorway, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet, she heard it, Jacob's voice, not playful or lazy, but hard and edged with something dark and final. "Not waiting anymore," he hissed into his phone, his words slicing through the air like shards of glass. "I can't spend the rest of my life like this. She can't give me a child. The whole wealth falls to me when she's gone. Her parents are dead. She's their only child. We'll say it was stress," he continued, his voice low and venomous, pacing the room just beyond Sophia's view. "We'll say the doctor warned her to rest. We'll do it tonight. We can find a supplier." Sophia froze in the hallway, the stack of towels slipping slightly in her suddenly numb hands, her mind racing like a trapped bird fluttering against the bars of a cage. Every lesson she had learned about careful hands and careful eyes stood up inside her like silent sentinels, urging her to stay hidden, to listen without being seen. She didn't gasp, her breath caught tight in her throat. She didn't drop anything, her fingers gripping the linens like a lifeline. She didn't whisper a horrified, "Oh God," even as her chest wanted to explode with the terror of it all. Footsteps clicked behind her then, a gentle perfume of jasmine wafting through the air like a soft warning. Madame Margaret approached, carrying her reading glasses in one hand and a thick folder of fabric designs in the other, walking toward the bedroom door as if nothing in the world could possibly be amiss, her mind clearly on the latest collection that would launch in the coming weeks. She reached for the handle, perhaps to call her husband to help carry a heavy box from the storage room or to open a window to let in the fresh, rain-scented air before the storm broke. Sophia moved faster than her fear allowed, stepping in front of Madame Margaret with a grace born of instinct, putting down the towels on a nearby console table with a soft thud, and pressing her hands softly but firmly over Madame Margaret's mouth to stifle any sound that might betray them. "Don't talk," Sophia mouthed, forming the words slowly with her lips, her eyes pleading with a silent urgency that conveyed the gravity without a whisper. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, Madame Margaret just stared, shock flickering across her elegant features as she realized her trusted maid had dared to intervene in such an intimate way. But something in Sophia's eyes, steady, bright, pleading with the fierce protectiveness of someone who had known loss and learned to guard against it, made her trust without question. Madame Margaret didn't call out, her hand frozen mid-air. She didn't push Sophia away or demand an explanation. She stayed very still, her body tensing as Jacob's voice continued from inside the bedroom, oblivious to the danger unfolding just beyond the door. "Yes, I have the contact," Jacob said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur as if the walls themselves might overhear, his footsteps pacing closer to the threshold. "One pill and rest. It looks natural. Make sure it's clean. I don't want news headlines or scandals, I want freedom. I want a new life, a younger wife, a family. This one has given me nothing but headaches and empty promises." Madame Margaret's face changed in that suspended moment, first confusion knitting her brows as the words sank in, then dawning understanding that twisted her expression into one of profound pain, her eyes widening as the betrayal pierced her like a dagger to the heart. She had fed this man at her own table, opened the doors of her vast empire to him without reservation. Watched him fly on her private jet to exotic locales and smile for the cameras with her arm in his during high society galas. She had chosen him over societal expectations, even when the world whispered about her decision to marry without heirs, without the children that fate had cruelly denied her. And now, in the dim hallway light, Sophia felt Madame Margaret tremble beneath her hand, the elegant woman's strength cracking like fine porcelain under the weight of such intimate treachery. Sophia gently took Madame Margaret's free hand in her own, her grip reassuring and steady, a silent vow in the touch that said she wouldn't let go. "Ma," she mouthed again, her lips forming the word with careful precision, no sound escaping to alert the man just beyond the door. She guided her employer away from the bedroom, their movements synchronized in hushed silence, retreating down the hallway toward the small study at the far end, where the heavy oak door promised a barrier against the unfolding nightmare. Sophia shut the study door behind them with a soft, deliberate click that echoed like a final decision in the quiet space. The room's walls lined with bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes and framed awards from Madame Margaret's triumphant career. Madame Margaret's fingers shook as she pulled out her phone with trembling hands, her other hand still clasped in Sophia's, drawing strength from the maid's unyielding calm. She dialed with urgent taps, her breath coming in shallow bursts. "Emergency," she whispered when the operator's voice answered on the line, her voice a fragile thread holding back the flood of fear. "Please come. My husband is planning to harm me." The operator's questions came rapid and professional, but Madame Margaret answered with short, clipped words, her eyes never leaving Sophia's face as if the young woman were the only anchor in the storm. The operator promised help, assuring her that units were on the way, their sirens already cutting through the gathering storm outside. The house seemed to hear everything in that charged silence, the air thick with unspoken dread, the distant rumble of thunder outside mirroring the turmoil within. The grand chandelier in the living room above gave a tiny, crystalline sound as if one delicate piece had brushed against another in the draft from the opening door, a fragile note of warning in the symphony of betrayal. Outside, the storm cracked open with a vengeance, rain beginning to fall in heavy sheets that lashed against the windows like nature itself was weeping for the innocence about to be shattered. Then the footsteps came back, heavy, purposeful, echoing down the marble hallway like the tolling of a funeral bell. Jacob left the bedroom and walked into the hallway, his phone call finished, his shoes tapping against the cool stone floor with the casual arrogance of a man who believed he controlled the narrative. He hummed a little tune under his breath, a jaunty melody that clashed horribly with the sinister intent Sophia had overheard, his mind clearly already plotting the next move in his twisted plan. He was heading toward the study now, drawn perhaps by some subconscious pull or the faint creak of the floorboards under Sophia and Madame Margaret's careful steps. Closer, closer. The handle turned with a slow, ominous click that sent a fresh wave of terror through Sophia's veins. Sophia glanced at the window, her mind flashing to the storm raging outside, lightning forking across the darkening Lagos sky like veins of electricity. She could hear it far away at first, then louder and more insistent. Sirens weaving through the wet streets of Eco like silver snakes slithering toward salvation, their wail cutting through the rain's relentless roar. Jacob smiled as he pushed the door open and stepped into the study, his eyes sweeping the room with predatory sharpness, landing first on Madame Margaret, pale but standing tall, and then on Sophia, the maid standing protectively in front of her like a small tree refusing to bend in a hurricane's gale. "What's this?" he asked, his voice silky smooth, laced with feigned surprise that didn't mask the cold calculation beneath. "A meeting I wasn't invited to?" Sophia lifted her chin defiantly, her heart pounding but her voice emerging steady as she positioned herself fully between Jacob and Madame Margaret, a human shield forged from quiet courage. "Ma, stand behind me," she said firmly, her words a command born of instinct and unyielding resolve, her body blocking the doorway like an unbreakable barrier. The front doors of the mansion burst open downstairs with a crash that reverberated through the house, heavy boots thudding against the marble floors as police officers stormed in, their rain-slicked uniforms dripping water that pooled like dark omens on the pristine tiles. The storm outside grew violent, lightning cracking across the Lagos sky in jagged bursts that illuminated the chaos within, thunder rumbling like the growl of justice finally arriving. The heavy boots of the policemen echoed against the marble floors of the mansion, urgent and unyielding as they rushed toward the study with radios crackling and voices calling out coordinates. Sophia's heart raced, but she kept her stance firm in front of Madame Margaret, like a wall no one could move, her simple maid's dress now a uniform of defiance in the face of evil. Jacob froze in the doorway, his confident smirk collapsing into a mask of shock and dawning fear as he saw the armed officers pushing into the study, their faces set in grim determination, hands resting on holsters with authority that brooked no argument. His eyes darted between his wife, pale and resolute, and the maid who had somehow become the architect of his downfall, confusion twisting his features like a man caught in a nightmare he thought he'd scripted perfectly. "What is this?" he barked, his voice trembling now, the arrogance draining from it like water from a punctured vessel, his once polished demeanor cracking under the weight of impending consequences. "Margaret, tell them to leave. I haven't done anything." But Madame Margaret stood still behind Sophia, her reading glasses low on her nose, tears shining in her eyes but her voice steady as a rock forged in the fires of betrayal. "You plan to kill me, Jacob," she said, her words cutting through the tension like a blade through fog, each syllable laced with the pain of shattered trust. "I heard it all. Every single word, the promises of freedom, the casual talk of my death like it was just another business deal to close." Jacob laughed nervously, the sound forced and brittle, his voice cracking like thin ice underfoot as he backed away a step. It was a joke. You know me. I was only trying to sound strong on the phone. That's all, nothing more than foolish talk between friends." The police officer in charge, a tall man with a stern face etched by years of seeing the worst humanity could offer, raised his hand authoritatively, his presence commanding the room like a sentinel of justice. "Sir, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder," he declared, his voice booming with finality, echoing off the bookshelves and crystal accents that had once symbolized luxury but now framed a scene of raw reckoning. "No," Jacob shouted, stepping back further, his back hitting the edge of a bookshelf as two officers moved forward with handcuffs at the ready, the metallic glint catching the storm's lightning flashes through the window. "It's a lie. She's my wife. She knows I love her. This is all a misunderstanding. Tell them, Margaret." But as he struggled futilely, two officers moved forward with practiced efficiency, gripping his arms firmly and snapping cold, unyielding handcuffs around his wrists with a click that echoed like the final note of a tragic symphony. Jacob turned his gaze sharply toward Sophia, his eyes burning with a mixture of raw fury and bitter regret, veins bulging in his neck as the reality crashed down. "You," he hissed, his voice low and venomous, dripping with the poison of a man whose empire of deceit was crumbling. "This is your doing, you meddling little maid, thinking you could play hero in my house." Sophia's chest tightened like a vice, but she didn't flinch, meeting his hateful stare with calm eyes that held the quiet strength of someone who had scrubbed floors and survived storms far greater than this one man's rage. "No, sir," she replied evenly, her voice steady and unbowed, carrying the weight of truth like a shield. "This is your doing, the choices you made, the betrayal you plotted in the shadows of the home you pretended to cherish." The police led him out of the study, his protests turning to desperate shouts that echoed down the hallway as he was dragged away, his once impeccable suit now rumpled and stained with the sweat of exposure. "I'm innocent. I'm being set up. Margaret, please, you know me, you know I'd never." Silence fell once the doors closed behind him, abrupt and heavy, broken only by the relentless drumming of rain against the windows and the fading rumble of thunder outside. Only the storm outside kept rumbling as if the sky itself had witnessed the betrayal and was still processing the injustice, its fury mirroring the whirlwind that had just swept through the mansion. Madame Margaret sank slowly into the nearest armchair, her hands trembling as she removed her glasses with deliberate care, the chain dangling like a broken link to her former life. For a moment she looked 10 years older, her refined strength stripped bare by the raw wound of betrayal, her elegant features etched with lines of exhaustion and sorrow that no amount of wealth could erase. Sophia hurried to her side, kneeling down gracefully on the Persian rug, her simple dress pooling around her like a humble cloak of protection. "Ma, are you all right?" she whispered, her voice soft but laced with concern, her hand reaching out to steady the woman who had become more than an employer in that instant of shared peril. Margaret reached out, gripping Sophia's hand tightly with both of hers, her fingers cold despite the warmth of the room, drawing strength from the young woman's unyielding presence. Her tears fell freely now, tracing silent paths down her cheeks, but her voice emerged steady, a testament to the resilience that had built an empire from threads and dreams. "If you hadn't stopped me, if you hadn't told me to listen," she shook her head slowly, the motion heavy with the what-ifs that swirled in her mind, "you saved my life, Sophia. You saw what I couldn't, what was right in front of me all along." Sophia lowered her eyes modestly, her throat tight with a swell of emotion she could barely name, relief, fear, and a profound sense of purpose that anchored her in the moment. "I only did what was right, Ma," she replied softly, her voice a gentle anchor in the storm's aftermath. "Anyone would have." Margaret cupped Sophia's face with her trembling hand, her touch warm and maternal, like a mother passing on a legacy of quiet strength. "No, you did more than that. You gave me the truth when lies had surrounded me for too long. You stood between me and danger without a second thought." Outside, the flashing red and blue lights of the police cars faded into the distance as they pulled away down the rain-slicked drive, carrying Jacob away to face the consequences of his dark ambitions. The house felt different now, emptier without his looming presence, yet safer in the newfound clarity that had shattered the illusion. But in that heavy silence, broken only by the patter of rain on the roof, a new chapter was beginning to unfold. Because tomorrow, the world would know what had transpired inside the Jacob mansion's gilded walls. And Sophia's life, once hidden in the shadows of service and survival, was about to change forever in ways she could scarcely imagine. The days after the trial felt like stepping into a new world for Sophia, one bathed in the harsh glare of public scrutiny and the warm glow of unexpected gratitude. Reporters swarmed outside the mansion's wrought iron gates like hungry birds circling a feast, eager to catch a glimpse of the billionaire CEO who had survived her husband's chilling betrayal, their cameras flashing relentlessly under the relentless Lagos sun. But when the gates finally swung open with a creak that echoed like the turning of a page, it wasn't just Madame Margaret who emerged, poised and regal in her signature blue lace gown, her reading glasses perched low as always. They saw Sophia standing beside her, no longer shrouded in the anonymity of her simple maid's uniform but dressed in a flowing golden gown that caught the light like sunlight on rippling water, elegant and glowing against her dark skin, her hair styled neatly in soft waves that framed her face with newfound confidence. Her hair, usually tied back in a practical ponytail to keep it out of the way during long hours of dusting and polishing, was now loose and styled with care, cascading in gentle waves that spoke of transformation. She looked nothing like the girl who had once scrubbed floors before dawn in the dim pre-dawn light, her hands raw from bleach and her back aching from bending over endless tasks. No, this Sophia was emerging from the shadows, stepping into the light as if reborn, her posture straight and her eyes bright with a mix of trepidation and resolve. No longer hidden in the shadows of service, Madame Margaret announced at a press gathering held in the mansion's grand garden, her voice steady and clear as crystal, carrying over the murmurs of the assembled journalists and the distant hum of the city beyond the walls. The garden, with its blooming hibiscus and neatly trimmed hedges glistening after a recent rain, seemed to hold its breath as she spoke, the air fragrant with jasmine and the promise of revelation. "Sophia is not just my maid, she is my daughter." The word sent ripples through the crowd like stones dropped into a still pond, cameras flashing wildly as reporters scribbled furiously on notepads and whispered into microphones, their faces a mix of shock and fascination. Sophia, overwhelmed by the weight of the declaration, bowed her head slightly, her chest swelling with emotion she could scarcely put into words. A profound sense of belonging that washed over her like a warm tide, mingled with the lingering ache of her own losses and the gratitude for this family she had never sought but desperately needed. She had gone from scrubbing marble floors on her knees to being recognized as family by one of the most powerful women in the country, a billionaire whose fabrics adorned the elite from Lagos to London, her name synonymous with innovation and unyielding drive. But Margaret didn't stop there, her resolve as firm as the foundations of her empire. She registered Sophia for the university entrance examinations, insisting with a gentle but unyielding hand on Sophia's shoulder that education was the key to unlocking doors that hard work alone couldn't always open. When Sophia passed with top marks, her scores lighting up the screen like stars in a night sky she had once only dreamed of reaching, Margaret enrolled her in one of the best universities in Lagos to study accountancy, the field that had always fascinated Sophia with its promise of order and chaos, numbers that told stories if you knew how to listen. The first day of class was terrifying for Sophia, a whirlwind of nerves twisting in her stomach like vines overtaking a garden as she walked across the sprawling campus in a crisp white blouse and navy skirt, clutching her textbooks close to her chest like shields against the unknown. Students whispered as she passed through the bustling quad, some having seen her face splashed across newspapers during the trial, others knowing her only as the enigmatic girl adopted by Madame Margaret, the enigmatic billionaire whose life had become a tabloid sensation overnight. But Sophia kept her head high, remembering Margaret's words from that fateful night in the study, whispered like a sacred mantra, "Hold your head high. You belong here." University life wasn't easy for her, far from it. Sophia studied late into the night in her modest dorm room, poring over dense textbooks until her eyes blurred with fatigue and her mind swam with formulas and case studies, the glow of her desk lamp the only constant in the storm of self-doubt. She faced jealous classmates who muttered under their breaths that she had bought her way in with sob stories and connections, not knowing the struggles that had shaped her, from nights sleeping on park benches with nothing but a thin shawl against the chill, to days spent in crowded markets haggling for scraps to eat, her hands calloused from labor that left no room for dreams. But she didn't let bitterness touch her heart, refusing to let the whispers erode the foundation Margaret had helped her build. She worked harder, her determination a quiet fire that burned brighter with every late-night cram session and every exam she aced through sheer will. She proved herself every step of the way, her grades climbing steadily until she stood at the top of her department, a testament to the resilience that had saved a life and now forged her own path. 4 years later, Sophia graduated as the best student in her department, the auditorium erupting with applause that washed over her like a wave of vindication as she walked across the stage in her black cap and gown, the tassel swaying like a pendulum marking the end of one struggle and the beginning of another. Madame Margaret sat in the front row, tears glistening in her eyes behind her signature glasses, clapping proudly with hands that had signed contracts worth millions but now trembled with the raw emotion of a mother watching her chosen daughter soar. When Sophia joined Margaret's company as the account officer, it felt like destiny weaving its threads back into her life, a full-circle moment that still sent shivers of disbelief through her. She no longer carried trays of tea or wiped glass tables until her fingers pruned. She carried files thick with financial data, signed documents that shaped the company's future, and gave presentations in boardrooms where her insights left executives nodding in respect, their skepticism melting away as numbers on screens told stories of success under her careful guidance. Her quiet strength, the same unyielding resolve that had once saved her boss from a poisoned cup or a shadowed blade, now guided the company's finances with precision and insight that turned heads and opened doors she had never dared to knock on before. It was during this time of newfound purpose and rising stature that Sophia met Johnson. He was a young executive from a rival fabrics firm, tall and kind-hearted with warm brown eyes that seemed to notice her in a way no one else ever had, not as the maid from the mansion's shadows, but as the brilliant mind who had risen from them. Their first conversation was about work, a chance encounter at a bustling industry conference in Victoria Island where the air hummed with the whir of sewing machines from demo booths and the chatter of deals being struck over glasses of sparkling wine. But soon it grew into late-night calls that stretched into the early hours, filled with shared laughter that bubbled like champagne over shared dreams, and stolen glances in crowded conference rooms where their eyes met across tables laden with fabric swatches and market reports. Within months, Johnson proposed in a quiet garden under the stars, his voice trembling with the same nervous hope Sophia had felt when she first stepped into Madame Margaret's world, a simple ring catching the moonlight like a promise etched in silver. Their wedding was nothing short of extravagant, a lavish affair that unfolded like a dream under the golden chandeliers of a grand hall in Eco, where silk drapes and shades of ivory and gold cascaded from the ceilings and floral arches bloomed with roses imported from afar. Margaret spared no expense, her generosity a tidal wave that swept Sophia into a celebration she had once only dreamed of in fleeting moments of exhaustion. Tables groaning under the weight of gourmet feasts from Lagos' finest chefs, music from a live orchestra that filled the air with melodies of joy, and guests in designer attire who toasted to a love story born from the unlikeliest of beginnings. As Sophia walked down the aisle in her flowing white gown that hugged her figure like a second skin, the fabric whispering promises of a future she had fought for, she saw Margaret smiling through tears in the front row, her joy shining brighter than any diamond in the hall, her glasses fogged slightly from the emotion as she clutched a handkerchief to her lips. But even as Sophia began her new life as a wife, basking in the warmth of Johnson's hand in hers and the cheers of their blended families, Margaret carried one decision heavy on her heart like a stone in her pocket, a weight she had borne alone in the quiet hours when the mansion's halls echoed emptily without Jacob's footsteps. The choice to face Jacob once again, not in the courtroom's harsh lights but in the stark reality of his confinement, where the man who had plotted her demise now sat behind bars, his empire of deceit reduced to regrets and iron bars. 2 years had passed since Sophia's wedding, a whirlwind of shared mornings with Johnson where sunlight filtered through their apartment windows as they planned their future over steaming cups of tea, quiet evenings filled with the soft sounds of their growing life together, and dreams of a family that bloomed like the fabrics Margaret designed, vibrant, enduring, woven from threads of hope Sophia had never thought possible. She often visited the mansion, where Madame Margaret welcomed her like a true daughter, enveloping her in hugs that smelled of jasmine perfume and the faint trace of ink from late-night sketches, their conversations now laced with the easy intimacy of family rather than the formal distance of employer and employee. But behind Margaret's gentle smile, which crinkled the corners of her eyes with genuine warmth, there was something she had not yet resolved, a shadow of the past that lingered like a stubborn stain on fine silk, refusing to fade no matter how many times she washed it in the waters of time. The shadow of Jacob. Though the court had closed its chapter on his crimes with a gavel's final strike, her heart had not mended fully, the betrayal a wound that throbbed with every heartbeat, a reminder of the man who had shared her bed and her boardroom only to plot her end for his own gain. She could not erase the betrayal that had shattered her world like fragile glass, yet she could not live forever shackled by bitterness either, its chains too heavy for a woman who had rebuilt an empire from the remnants of personal ruin. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the mansion's garden in hues of amber and rose, Margaret asked Sophia to join her at the wrought iron table under the sprawling mango trees, their leaves rustling softly in the breeze like whispers of secrets long buried. The air was thick with the scent of ripe fruit and blooming jasmine, a serene backdrop to the heavy conversation that was about to unfold. Margaret adjusted her glasses with a steady hand, her fingers tracing the familiar chain as she spoke slowly, each word measured like a seamstress threading a needle through tough fabric. "My child," she began, her voice a gentle current carrying the weight of unspoken pain, "forgiveness is not about them deserving it, the betrayers who seek to dim your light. It's about freeing ourselves from the darkness they cast, allowing our own light to shine unhindered once more. I've carried the weight of Jacob's betrayal long enough, a burden that has shadowed my every step like a thief in the night. Tomorrow I will see him, not with anger but with the peace I have fought to reclaim." Sophia's eyes widened in surprise, her heart skipping a beat as she leaned forward, the golden light filtering through the leaves dappling her face like fleeting doubts. "Ma, after everything he planned to do to you, plotting in the shadows of your own home, whispering death into a phone like it was just another order for silk? Why now, after all this time?" Margaret smiled faintly, a bittersweet curve of her lips that held the wisdom of someone who had stared into the abyss and chosen to climb out. "Because strength is not only in punishing those who wrong us, my dear, it's also in letting go of the chains they forged, breaking free to weave a new tapestry of life. Jacob's actions scarred me deeply, but holding on to that rage would only scar me further, turning my victory into another prison of my own making." The next day Margaret entered the prison with Sophia by her side, the echo of iron gates closing behind them sending a chill through Sophia's body like icy fingers tracing her spine, the sterile corridors stretching out like veins leading to the heart of judgment. Guards led them through the dimly lit halls, their boots thudding rhythmically against the cold concrete, the air heavy with the scent of disinfectant and despair that clung to every surface. Jacob was brought out moments later, his once proud frame now bent and diminished by time and regret, his hair grayer than Sophia remembered, streaked with white like threads of faded ambition, his face lined with deep furrows that spoke of sleepless nights and the relentless grind of confinement. When his eyes met Margaret's across the stark visiting room, with its bolted-down tables and chairs and the ever-watchful gaze of guards in the corners, he froze as if struck by lightning, his shackled hands twitching at his sides. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he dropped to his knees before the glass partition that separated them, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks in silent rivers of remorse that carved paths through the lines of a face once so assured. "I don't deserve to see you," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken, cracking like dry earth under the weight of his confession. "I was blind, greedy, foolish, a man consumed by shadows I cast myself. Yet here you stand, radiant and unbroken." Margaret's voice was calm and steady like a river carving through stone, her words flowing with the quiet authority of someone who had rebuilt from ruins. "Jacob, you tried to destroy me in the dead of night, weaving lies into the fabric of our shared life, but I refuse to let your darkness snuff out my light. I am withdrawing the case against you. You will be released from these walls that echo with your regrets. But our marriage ends today, severed like a thread pulled too tight." From her elegant handbag, she drew out divorce papers with deliberate care, the crisp pages rustling like fallen leaves in autumn, and laid them before him on the narrow ledge, the ink bold and final against the stark white. "I forgive you," she continued softly, her eyes meeting his with a compassion that cut deeper than anger ever could, "but never again as husband and wife. Let this be the end of the chains that bound us." Jacob's sobs filled the small room, raw and unrestrained, his shoulders shaking as he clutched the papers to his chest like a lifeline to redemption he hadn't earned. "I don't deserve this kindness," he said brokenly, his voice thick with the gravel of genuine regret, tears blurring the words on the page. "You've given me mercy I never sought, a chance I never deserved." Margaret's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her resolve held firm as she turned away, Sophia supporting her arm with a gentle touch that spoke volumes of their unbreakable bond. "Sophia," Jacob called out weakly as they walked away, his voice a faint echo in the corridor, tell her I'm sorry." But Margaret didn't look back, her steps steady as they left the prison behind, the iron gates clanging shut like the final stitch in a seam long torn. 2 years later, Sophia held her newborn baby girl in her arms, the tiny bundle wrapped in soft pink blankets that smelled of fresh linen and new beginnings, her cries a sweet melody of life affirming the dream she had dared to weave. She and Johnson had named her Amara Grace, a name that rolled off the tongue like a promise. Amara for eternal love, Grace for the unmerited favor that had reshaped their lives.